If you just watched a 40K lore video and have no clue what the hell is happening, good. That means you're paying attention. And if you're here because of Space Marine 2, yeah, stick around. There's a figure at the center of Warhammer 40,000 fan lore who most newcomers never hear about. His name is Olanius Pius. In one version of the story, he's an ordinary Imperial Guardsman, a regular human being with a laser gun, a bayonet, and flak armor that wouldn't stop a thrown rock. In another version, he's an immortal who has walked the earth for tens of thousands of years, a perpetual, cursed to live through every catastrophe humanity has ever inflicted upon itself. In a third, he doesn't exist at all, replaced by a custodian, one of the Emperor's elite bodyguards. In a fourth, he's swapped out for a Space Marine Terminator. 4 accounts, published by the same company across different decades through different authors, all carrying the stamp of official canon, none definitively true. Olanius Pius isn't just a character in the lore. He's a perfect demonstration of why the lore works the way it does, and why you can't find a straight answer about anything in this universe. September 9th, 2024. Space Marine 2 launched into an industry that had largely treated Warhammer 40,000 as niche, a hobby for miniature painters and Black Library novel obsessives, distant from mainstream gaming. Within weeks, the game obliterated expectations. By November 29th, 5 million players had poured into a universe that had been accumulating lore for nearly 4 decades. Millions of people who'd never held a paintbrush, never cracked a codex, never argued about Primarch rankings on Reddit. They'd just spent hours chainsawing through Tyrannid swarms, battling chaos-corrupted Thousand Sons Marines, watching their battle brothers succumb to demonic corruption. Adrenaline still buzzing, they did what anyone would do. Opened YouTube, typed Warhammer 40,000 lore explained. What they found was a wall. The typical comprehensive lore video follows a rigid format. Start with the War in Heaven, a cosmic conflict between godlike beings billions of years ago. Proceed through the Age of Terra, the Age of Strife, the Unification Wars, the Great Crusade, the Horus Heresy, the Scouring, the Age of the Imperium. Arrive, exhausted, at the 42nd millennium. Dozens of factions, hundreds of named characters. A vocabulary so dense it functions as another language entirely. Adeptus Mechanicus, Ecclesiarchy, Geller Fields, Astronomicon. For someone who just wanted to know why the big armored guys were fighting bugs, it's paralyzing. Comment sections tell the story better than any analysis could. WTF is going on? I looked this up because I wanted to learn, wrote one viewer, frustration palpable in every abbreviation. I'm still lost ASF, admitted another, the crying laughing emoji doing nothing to disguise genuine defeat. Only 9 minutes in, and I'm already confused. 9 minutes into a video that might run 4 hours. One person demanded, with barely contained exasperation, to know where the main canon story was and which media to use. A question revealing the assumption every newcomer carries, that somewhere, a definitive version of this universe must exist. And 501 points of engagement piled onto a single post. Any other noobs here because of Space Marine 2? 500 hands raised at once, everyone saying the same thing. I'm here. I'm lost. Is anyone else lost too? Those comprehensive videos are brilliantly made. The top comment on one pulled 4,630 points of engagement from a viewer whose mind was blown away by the sheer scope. Rightly so. Those creators pour thousands of hours into research and narration. Their work serves a real audience with incredible skill. But their work is the second step in understanding 40K. Almost nobody provides the first step. A different commenter, buried with just 22 likes, handed everyone that prerequisite in 6 words. This universe is hell. That's the decoder key. And Olanius Pius, standing at the hinge of the universe's defining moment, a mortal facing down a demigod with nothing but a bayonet, is the proof that it works. The Warhammer 40,000 universe is designed as unreliable propaganda from a fascist theocracy, and the confusion newcomers feel is the correct reading. Understanding that single concept unlocks everything else. The evidence starts with Games Workshop itself. The company behind 40,000 maintains an editorial philosophy unlike any other franchise, distilled by the community into a phrase: everything is canon, not everything is true. Every codex, novel, campaign supplement, and lore fragment exists within the universe. None can be fully trusted. Games Workshop designer Tuomas Pirinen confirmed that 40,000 lore is deliberately written from unreliable in-universe faction perspectives, specifically to create conflicting narratives and leave room for doubt. George Mann, head of publishing at Games Workshop, stated in 2008 that Black Library novels don't establish canon the way rulebooks do. Each author's work represents an alternative version of the worlds they're depicting. Aaron Dembski Bowden, among Black Library's most celebrated writers, explicitly doesn't reconcile contradictions between his novels and other authors' work. That freedom comes from corporate design philosophy, not negligence. An academic study of the franchise confirmed that the 40,000 background is practically designed for creative reinterpretation, containing deliberate breathing space that invites contradiction and ambiguity. In Star Wars, Marvel, or Lord of the Rings, a hierarchy of canonical authority governs the ecosystem. Films override novels, override comics, or some variation. Warhammer 40,000 deliberately rejects that model. The viewer who demanded to know where to find the main canon story was unknowingly asking the deepest question the setting poses. The answer is nowhere. Deliberately, beautifully, infuriatingly, nowhere. This franchise treats contradictions as load-bearing walls. Remove them and the architecture collapses. The Alanius Pius story is Exhibit A. It sits at the most consequential moment in 40,000 years of fictional history, the final confrontation between the Emperor of Mankind and his son Horus, corrupted by the power of chaos. The confrontation represents the climax of the Horus heresy, a galaxy-spanning civil war that shattered the Imperium and determined the shape of human civilization for the next 10,000 years. Everything in the setting flows backward from this single scene. The state religion, the Golden Throne, the slow collapse into darkness, all of it hinges on what happened in that final confrontation. Every version of the scene carries the same emotional architecture. As the accounts describe it, Horus, transformed into something barely recognizable, towers over the Emperor's broken body. The Emperor, the psychic architect of galactic conquest, lies defeated, unable to bring himself to destroy his own son. Something has to intervene. Something has to break the deadlock. In the earliest tellings, versions circulating through early edition rulebooks and campaign supplements, when 40K was still coasting on Rick Priestley's original satirical energy, that something is Alanius Pius, a guardsman, an ordinary human, one of the trillions of expendable soldiers the Imperium feeds into its wars without a second thought. He steps forward, lasgun raised, bayonet fixed, against a being that could unmake him by blinking. In this telling, Horus obliterates him. The kill is so thorough, so contemptuous, that the very soul of Alanius Pius is destroyed. No afterlife, no echo in the warp, no final flicker of consciousness. Erased from existence entirely. A billion-year-old universe and a man with a bayonet, and the universe didn't even have to try. In witnessing that casual annihilation, the murder of one insignificant, brave, doomed human being, the Emperor finally understands that no trace of his son remains inside the monster Horus has become. He gathers everything he has left and destroys Horus utterly. That scene resonated through the fandom for decades because it captured the emotional core of Warhammer 40,000 with devastating efficiency. Expendable humans always die making sacrifices the powerful will never acknowledge. Alanius Pius became a folk hero, the patron saint of the Imperial Guard, celebrated in fan art, forum posts, and community lore precisely because he represented the most human thing in a universe stripped of humanity. Then Games Workshop started changing the story. Not once, repeatedly, across years, through successive Black Library novels and new Codex editions, each revision layering over the last like sediment burying a fossil. Later publications introduced the concept of perpetuals, immortal beings woven throughout human history, unable to truly die. Ollanius Pius became Ollanius Person in some of these accounts, reimagined as one of these undying figures. The perpetual concept redefined the sacrifice. Instead of a terrified mortal making an impossible choice, Ollanius Person carried tens of thousands of years of accumulated memory. He had survived countless deaths. He knew what Horus could do. The sacrifice still happened, but its nature shifted fundamentally. An immortal choosing to die in a way that might actually stick, his soul consumed entirely, the one death a perpetual can't regenerate from, carries genuine weight. But it's a categorically different weight than an ordinary man with a single lifespan choosing to spend his only death on something that won't work. Other versions went further. The guardsman vanished entirely, replaced by a custodian, one of the emperor's personal bodyguards, engineered for exactly this kind of combat. In this telling, the sacrifice lost the radical vulnerability that made it meaningful. A custodian dying to protect the emperor was doing exactly what custodians were built to do. Tragedy dissolved into specification compliance. A machine performing its intended function isn't a story, it's a warranty claim. Still other accounts substituted a space marine terminator, a Horus Heresy-era legionary who threw himself between Horus and the emperor. Noble, perhaps, but a genetically enhanced post-human sacrificing himself for his creator is the entire point of the Space Marine program. Duty, replacing desperation, robbed the scene of its rawness. Fans spent years arguing over which version represented objective truth. Forums burned with it. Flame wars sprawled across every 40K community for the better part of 2 decades. Entire threads devoted to parsing which edition had the correct account, which author's retelling superseded which, whether the perpetual version invalidated the guardsman version or merely enriched it. Aaron Dembski Bowden didn't reconcile his own work with other authors' conflicting accounts because the editorial philosophy told him he didn't need to. Every Black Library author operated under the same principle of deliberate narrative multiplicity. The fury in those fan debates was real. It was also misplaced, because the setting had already answered every one of those arguments, if anyone had been willing to hear it. Every version is canon. No version is definitively true. The only records of this event were written, preserved, copied, censored, rewritten, and recensored inside a regime that has spent 10,000 years systematically destroying its own history. That regime started as a joke. In 1987, Rick Priestley created the original Warhammer 40,000, then called Rogue Trader, as satire. Dark, British, savagely funny satire of authoritarianism, jingoism, and the kind of totalitarian thinking that treats human beings as resources to be expended. The skull-covered architecture of the Imperium, the bombastic propaganda, the grotesque merger of religion and militarism, all designed to be ridiculous. 2000 AD Comics Energy, Judge Dredd in Space. Scholarly analysis describes the setting as a brutally authoritarian, fascist theocracy. The joke was that anyone could look at this nightmare civilization and think it was aspirational. Over decades, as the lore expanded through thousands of publications, the satire calcified into sincerity for much of the audience. Space Marines, conceived as brainwashed child soldiers, kidnapped before puberty, surgically mutilated into post-human killing machines, became unironic heroes. The Emperor, a psychic warlord who conquered the galaxy through genocide, became a figure people genuinely admired. Games Workshop pushed back in 2021 with a public statement of unusual directness. There are no goodies in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. None. The Imperium, they declared, is a monstrous civilization. The satirical architecture never changed, and that architecture shapes how every piece of lore reaches you, including the story of Ollanius Pius. The Imperium of Man doesn't just suppress information as a plot point. Consuming the lore replicates the experience of living under that suppression. The Adeptus Administratum, The Imperium's bureaucratic arm employs tens of billions of scribes and lobotomized servitors across 1,000,000 worlds to maintain records. Their primary method involves copying decaying vellum documents by hand, generation after generation, for over 10,000 years. A galactic game of telephone played by billions of cyborgs running on degraded cognitive routines. In-universe data doubles every 8 months and is stockpiled without evaluation or examination. Nobody checks. Nobody cross-references. The accumulated errors of 100 centuries pile up in archives nobody will ever audit. Deliberate erasure compounds the institutional decay. The Ordo Hereticus, one arm of the dreaded Inquisition, actively suppresses knowledge of chaos, expunging records and executing witnesses. When the Grey Knights deploy against demonic incursions, surviving witnesses are frequently mind-wiped or executed. Entire planetary populations have been sterilized, billions exterminated, because they witnessed something the Imperium wanted buried. The ecclesiarchy, the state religion, rewrites history as standard theological practice. Scholarly analysis identifies the regime as investing an immense effort in propaganda and forbidding citizens from accessing contradictory information. The greatest erasure sits at the Imperium's foundation. The Emperor's original philosophy, the imperial truth, was strictly atheistic, rejecting religion entirely. After his interment on the Golden Throne, it was replaced wholesale by the Imperial Creed, which deifies him as a god, directly contradicting everything he believed when alive. The Imperium's founding ideology and its current state religion are mutually exclusive. Records of one have been destroyed to accommodate the other. The Emperor, if he could still speak, would be declared a heretic by his own church. Olanius Pius's story passed through all of this machinery. Every version of his sacrifice was filtered through imperial scribes who copy what they barely understand, inquisitors who redact what threatens doctrine, theologians who reshape events to serve the state religion. An ordinary guardsman might get elevated to perpetual status because the Imperium can't stomach the idea that a regular human mattered more than a demigod at the pivotal moment of imperial history. The bureaucracy of myth-making demands a grander figure, so a clerk somewhere, or a theologian, or a propagandist with an agenda inflates him into something larger. Alternatively, he gets erased entirely and replaced with a custodian because acknowledging the guard's sacrifice would undermine the mythology of superhuman supremacy that justifies the entire Space Marine program. Each version reveals the political machinery behind it. Each contradiction is a fingerprint left by the apparatus that produced it. That apparatus is why you couldn't find the main canon story. You weren't failing to search hard enough. You were detecting the fundamental condition of the setting. In a universe where a fascist theocracy has waged war on its own past for 100 centuries, no authoritative account survives intact. The absence of a single canon is the canon. This universe is hell. Once that principle locks in, newcomer questions dissolve without requiring memorization. Most people want to know if Space Marines are the good guys. Space Marines are children kidnapped before puberty, subjected to surgical mutilation so extreme it would make a torturer wince, psychologically broken and rebuilt as weapons, deployed as instruments of a regime built on galactic-scale genocide. The Emperor doesn't fix things. He's a 10,000-year-old corpse strapped to the Golden Throne, kept between life and death by the daily sacrifice of thousands of psychic humans, worshipped as a god in direct contradiction to everything he stood for. Humanity doesn't win. The setting is architecturally designed so it can't. The Imperium is a civilization collapsing in slow motion across millennia, and the lore documents that collapse from the inside through the warped lens of its own propaganda. Every faction runs on the same engine of despair, different fuel, same combustion. The Tau Empire gets described in imperial sources as naive and insignificant, and the decoder key makes you register that the Imperium, a regime that considers every non-human species worthy of extermination, supplied that characterization. The Eldar get painted as arrogant and manipulative, framed through millennia of imperial xenophobia that has never once produced an honest ethnography. Orcs are arguably the happiest faction in the entire setting, hardwired for combat at a genetic level in a galaxy that provides infinite war. They're the only species getting exactly what they want, and the fact that mindless joy and violence is the closest thing to contentment this universe offers tells you everything about the galaxy they inhabit. No good guys. Different flavors of catastrophe, all spiraling inward. One commenter described their girlfriend getting so upset that the tiny humans died, almost certainly watching Imperial Guardsmen, regular people armed with flashlight-equivalent lasguns and flak armor that might as well be paper, thrown by the millions into meat grinders against horrors that dwarf them in every conceivable way. That woman understood Warhammer 40,000 at its deepest level without knowing the name of a single Primarch. She understood it because she felt what Olanius Pius represents. The expendable always die, and their courage is real, and nobody keeping records will honor it honestly. Imperial Guardsmen survive hours after deployment against serious threats. They're the Imperium's most renewable resource, entries on a logistics spreadsheet maintained by bureaucrats who will never see a front line. Olanius Pius was one of them, or he was an immortal, or he was a convenient myth grafted onto a custodian's sacrifice because someone in the administratum decided a superhuman death served the imperial narrative better than a mortal one. The records can't agree because the records were never designed to agree. Their sole function was preserving the regime's power at the direct expense of whatever actually happened 10,000 years ago. In Space Marine 2, you walk past servitors in every corridor of the battle barge. Background props, scenery. The game never pauses to tell you that each shambling, cable-threaded figure was once a person with a name and a life. Criminals, political prisoners, citizens who fell through bureaucratic cracks, lobotomized, fitted with mechanical augmentations, enslaved as biological machines. Many retain vestiges of awareness, fragments of who they were, trapped in bodies that no longer belong to them, serving the civilization that unmade them. Standard operating procedure for the faction you're playing as. The decoder key doesn't add darkness to the lore. The darkness was always written there, in the margins, behind the bolter fire and cathedral spires, buried under 10,000 years of institutional messaging designed to make atrocity feel like routine. Olanius Pius felt that darkness at the end. Whether mortal or immortal, guardsman or perpetual, he stood in a room full of gods and monsters and chose to be the smallest, most breakable thing in it. And the Imperium's records couldn't even let that sacrifice stand as it happened. They had to reshape him, immortal, superhuman, mythic, or simply deleted, because a fascist theocracy can't tolerate the idea that an ordinary person, acting alone and without institutional sanction, could matter more than the systems built to replace individual courage with obedience. Every retcon of Pius is the Imperium flinching from its own story. Every contradictory version is the propaganda apparatus doing what it was built to do. When comprehensive lore videos state the Emperor united humanity during the Great Crusade, the decoder key reveals what that language obscures. He violently conquered every human civilization in the galaxy and annihilated their cultures, their religions, their self-determination. When Space Marines are described as humanity's greatest defenders, the key exposes them as child soldiers engineered from stolen children to serve a tyrant's vision. When the Horus Heresy is framed as the Great Betrayal, the key prompts the obvious follow-up. Betrayal according to whose records? Which scribes wrote that narrative? Which inquisitor approved it? Which lobotomized servitor copied it onto vellum already crumbling to dust? The fan community debates, was Horus right? For a reason. A son who rebels against a father who built an empire on blood and enforced amnesia might have had a point, and the Imperium's entire information apparatus exists to make sure you never seriously entertain that possibility. Those epic, comprehensive lore videos that overwhelmed you weren't doing anything wrong. They're extraordinary pieces of work, and once you hold the decoder key, every claim they make becomes richer. Every imperial triumph sounds different when you know the narrator is unreliable. Every heroic last stand gains a shadow. Every faction description begs the question, according to whom? The same 4-hour video that drowned you in jargon last week becomes a completely different experience when you stop trying to memorize it and start reading it as a document produced by a civilization at war with objective truth. You weren't too slow for this universe. Warhammer 40,000 was doing precisely what it was built to do, drowning you in contradictory propaganda until truth dissolved. Citizens of the Imperium live that reality every day of their miserable lives. For 20 confused minutes on YouTube, so did you. Olanius Pius stood in front of a god with a bayonet. Or he stood there carrying the weight of millennia of unkillable memory. Or he never stood there at all, and a custodian died in his place, and someone, somewhere in the grinding bureaucratic machinery of the administratum, decided the story sounded better with an ordinary man in it. The regime chewed up his story and produced 4 different versions, because that's what it does to everything. Every battle, every hero, every truth that passes through its 10,000-year system of scribes, censors, and theological revisionists. An ordinary man's sacrifice gets inflated, rewritten, contested, and buried under layers of institutional distortion until the facts are gone and only the feeling remains. One small person, standing anyway, knowing it won't be enough. That feeling doesn't require a timeline, doesn't require a faction chart or 4 hours of proper nouns. It requires 6 words and the willingness to let them reshape everything you encounter from here forward. This universe is hell. Someone stood up in it anyway. You're not lost anymore. You know something most fans took years to figure out. Go fall down the rabbit hole, armed this time. Subscribe for more stories like this.